The Mafia boss saw the black maid pull his son from the mansion pool, and his soul shattered at what almost happened. Olivia Carter, a quiet, humble maid working at the Romano mansion, had never imagined that today would change her life forever. The mansion, with its towering marble walls and sparkling pools, was a symbol of wealth and power, and Olivia, like many others in the household, lived in the background, invisible to the world around her. She had come to work for the Romano family a few months ago, after losing her job at a local diner. Despite her difficult circumstances, Olivia was grateful for the opportunity to care for Jason Romano, the young son of Victor Romano, the powerful Mafia boss. Jason was a sweet boy, full of life, but he had a tendency to wander near the pool, a danger she had been warned about. As Olivia went about her usual duties, she heard a loud splash, followed by a desperate scream. She rushed outside, her heart pounding in her chest. Jason, only 4 years old, was struggling in the deep end of the pool, his small arms flailing helplessly. Without thinking, Olivia dove in. She pulled Jason to the edge of the pool, gasping for air as she hauled him out, her muscles aching from the weight of his tiny body. Her hands trembled as she checked his pulse, relief flooding through her when she felt the faint beat. But as she looked up, her eyes met the cold, dark gaze of Victor Romano. He had witnessed the entire thing. His expression was unreadable, his face a mask of emotionless authority. For a moment, Olivia was frozen in place, unsure of what to do next. She had saved his son's life, but she knew that in this world, actions like these could often come with a price. To her surprise, Victor didn't shout, didn't storm toward her with fury. Instead, he walked toward her slowly, his steps measured, like a predator sizing up its prey. Olivia stood up, still holding Jason, who was now coughing and crying softly. She tried to steady her breath, but her heart raced, the weight of the moment crashing down on her. "Are you okay?" Victor's voice was softer than she had expected, but there was still an edge to it, a sharpness that made her skin prickle. Olivia nodded, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. The air was thick with tension. Then, unexpectedly, Victor softened. He crouched down, his eyes lingering on his son before turning back to Olivia. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice breaking through the cold walls he had built around himself. Olivia could barely believe it. The powerful Mafia boss, known for his ruthlessness and iron will, was showing gratitude. His soul had been shattered by the near tragedy, but for the first time, Olivia saw a different side of him. A side that wasn't just a cold, calculating mob boss. A side that, perhaps, was capable of feeling something more. "You saved him," Victor repeated, his voice a low murmur. Olivia felt the weight of his words, but the overwhelming emotion in her chest made it hard to speak. She simply nodded again, still trying to grasp the gravity of what had just happened. As Victor turned to walk away, he gave a final look at Olivia, a gaze filled with something that wasn't entirely cold, and something that wasn't entirely warm. But there was a shift, a subtle change that neither of them could ignore. And in that moment, something inside Olivia knew that this day would mark the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Jason, but for her as well. Victor Romano couldn't stop staring at Olivia. She stood there, holding his son, her face flushed with panic, her hands trembling. She had saved Jason's life. He wasn't sure what shocked him more, the fact that his son had almost drowned, or the fact that the woman he had always viewed as nothing more than a maid had just done something he couldn't. She had acted without hesitation, diving in, pulling Jason from the water like it was second nature. The vulnerability that hit him in that moment wasn't something he was used to feeling. He was a man who controlled empires, who held the power of life and death in his hands. And yet, there he was, standing in his own mansion, feeling like he had no control over what had just happened. As Olivia looked at him, she was still trying to calm her racing heartbeat, her eyes not meeting his directly. She was unsure what he was thinking. Did he feel anger? Was she in trouble for disobeying the unspoken rule that the staff were not to interfere with the family? For the first time since she started working here, Olivia felt like a stranger in a place that had once felt like her only refuge. Victor's gaze softened as he watched her, but it wasn't a softness of pity. It was something more unexpected. He had spent so much of his life behind walls of cold authority, never allowing anyone to get too close. But something about Olivia's bravery, her kindness, it shifted something inside him. It reminded him of his late wife, of her tender touch, her ability to comfort their son in ways that he never could. But he couldn't allow himself to dwell on that. He couldn't afford to. He was the Mafia boss, the leader of an empire. And yet, there he stood, feeling like a powerless father, shaken by a moment he could never undo. "You saved him," Victor said, his voice quiet, barely above a whisper. Olivia nodded, still holding Jason close, trying to reassure him with her touch. She felt the weight of Victor's eyes on her, and it made her feel small, exposed. She had always kept a distance, knowing the rules of her place in this world. But in that one moment, those rules didn't seem to matter. She had done something right, and that scared her. "Are you okay?" Victor asked again, his voice rougher now, almost as if he were asking himself the question, not her. Olivia nodded again, trying to steady her breath. "He'll be fine," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But he needs to rest." Victor looked at Jason, his son's small frame still shaking from the cold, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. It broke Victor's heart to see him like this. "Take him inside," he ordered softly, almost too quietly for Olivia to hear. She hesitated, unsure whether to question him or simply follow his command. She had no idea how to navigate this new dynamic between them. "Yes, sir," she finally replied, moving quickly to carry Jason into the warmth of the house. Victor followed them inside, his footsteps heavy on the marble floors, but he kept a distance. He watched as Olivia gently placed Jason on the couch, covering him with a blanket, her hands still shaking from the adrenaline. She was doing everything she could to comfort him, but it was clear to Victor that she wasn't just comforting his son, she was comforting herself, too. "Thank you," he said, his voice low, carrying more weight than he had ever intended. Olivia froze, her back to him as she gently stroked Jason's hair. She had expected to be reprimanded, to be told she had overstepped her boundaries, but the words he spoke were not what she had anticipated. She turned slowly to face him, her eyes wide with surprise. "You saved him," Victor repeated, his gaze softening once more. He was a man who rarely spoke of gratitude, and it felt foreign to him. Olivia met his gaze, her expression unreadable. She could feel the tension in the air, the awkwardness of the moment pressing down on them both. She wasn't sure what to say, what to do. She had always kept to herself, never crossing the line between staff and family. But now, in this moment, the line felt blurred. Victor stood in the doorway, his presence overwhelming yet strangely comforting. Olivia noticed the faint flicker of emotion in his eyes, something she had never seen before. Was it guilt? Regret? Or something deeper, something more human than the persona he showed to the world? "You did what none of us could," he said, his voice quieter this time, almost gentle. Olivia nodded, unsure of how to respond. She wasn't used to being praised. In fact, she wasn't sure how to process it. But it wasn't the praise that stuck with her, it was the change she saw in Victor's eyes. There was a shift, something she couldn't quite place. A subtle change in how he viewed her role in this house. It made her nervous. It made her think. What would happen now? How would things change between them? Olivia had always been just the maid, invisible to the world around her. But in this moment, she felt like she had just become someone more than that. Victor stood in the doorway, watching Olivia as she sat beside Jason, her hands gently stroking his hair. The boy had finally fallen into a restless sleep, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm with the soft rise of the blanket. Olivia's movements were slow, deliberate, as though she were trying to reassure herself as much as she was comforting the child. She didn't look up at Victor, but he could see the subtle way her shoulders tensed as she quietly hummed a lullaby. The song seemed to calm her, and Victor couldn't help but wonder why. He had never seen this side of Olivia before. The maid who had always kept to herself, who had quietly fulfilled her duties without ever making a fuss, was now the person who had saved his son's life. For a brief moment, Victor felt a vulnerability he wasn't used to. He cleared his throat, stepping further into the room. Olivia didn't flinch, but she didn't acknowledge him either. He wasn't sure why, but he felt compelled to stay, to watch. "He's going to be okay," Olivia murmured without looking up, her voice soft. "He just needs rest." Victor nodded, but the words felt hollow, as though something much deeper had shifted inside him. He had seen fear in his son's eyes earlier, fear that was now replaced by exhaustion. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that same fear. A fear he couldn't control. The same fear he had felt the day he had lost his wife. It was different now, though. This time, it wasn't just about losing someone he loved. It was about feeling helpless. It was about realizing how much of his life had been spent controlling everything around him, but never really living. He wasn't sure what had changed, but something about Olivia's quiet strength made him feel exposed. She had done what he couldn't. She had saved Jason when he, the one with all the power, had been paralyzed by the situation. As he watched her, he realized that in that moment, she had not only saved his son, she had also saved him. "Thank you," he said, the words sounding strange coming from him. Olivia looked up then, her eyes wide with surprise. She had never expected him to say that. She had always been the one who kept her emotions buried, the one who stayed out of the way, the one who never asked for anything. Yet here she was, facing the one person she had always avoided. "You didn't have to do that," Victor continued, his voice softening. "But you did." Olivia swallowed, not sure how to respond. She wasn't used to being praised, and she certainly wasn't used to this kind of attention. She had only done what anyone else would have done in her position, but to him, it was more than just saving his son. It was something else entirely. Something that made him feel a connection to her that he had never felt before. "It was nothing," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I just couldn't let him drown." There was a quiet pause between them. The weight of what had just happened lingered in the air, hanging heavy like a storm cloud that refused to break. Victor studied her, his eyes not just on her face, but on the way she held herself. There was something about her, something he hadn't noticed before. The way her body seemed to carry an inner strength, even when she thought no one was looking. It was as if she had always been capable of so much more than anyone, including him, had ever realized. And now, for the first time, he could see it. She wasn't just a maid. She wasn't just a servant. She was a woman of substance. A woman who had acted with a kind of courage he had never thought possible from someone like her. It unsettled him. And yet, it also intrigued him. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice barely audible now. Olivia met his gaze, her expression unreadable. She wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but she couldn't help but feel a shift in the way he looked at her. It was subtle, but it was there. "You don't have to say anything," she replied. "I did what I had to do." She didn't want to dwell on it, didn't want to let this moment change anything. She was just doing her job, after all. She had no place in his world. But something told her that this would not be the last time their paths crossed in such a way. Something had shifted between them, and no matter how much she tried to ignore it, she knew that things would never be the same again. "I appreciate it, more than you know," Victor said finally, his voice steady but his eyes still full of something that made Olivia feel exposed. She wasn't sure if it was gratitude or something else, but she felt it. A tension that hadn't been there before. Something different in the way he was looking at her. She didn't know what to make of it, so she simply nodded, choosing to break the silence. "He'll be fine," she repeated, her voice gentle. "Just give him some time." "I will," Victor replied, his gaze lingering on her a moment longer than necessary. "And thank you, Olivia, for everything." Olivia wasn't sure how to respond, so she simply nodded once more, her gaze dropping to the floor as she stepped away from him. She didn't want to linger too long. The longer she stayed, the more she could feel the weight of his presence bearing down on her, and she knew that this was a moment she would never forget. But she also knew it was a moment she would never be able to change. Victor stood in the doorway, his mind racing. He had not expected this. A simple act of kindness, one that was so foreign to him, had managed to shake him to his core. Olivia, the woman he had once seen as nothing more than a servant, had just saved his son's life. He had always believed in control, in power, and in never letting anyone into his world. But now, he was standing there, feeling something he had long buried inside. Something human, something vulnerable. He couldn't explain it, but there was no denying the shift he felt. It wasn't just gratitude he was feeling. It was something deeper. He couldn't help but replay the moment over and over in his mind. How she had jumped in without a second thought. How she had pulled Jason from the water with such determination. It was a quiet heroism, one that he couldn't ignore. As he looked at Olivia, sitting quietly beside Jason, her back to him, he realized something. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't just another person in his household, another face in the background. She had shown him a side of himself he hadn't wanted to see. The part of him that still felt. The part of him that was capable of vulnerability. Victor stepped into the room fully now, his footsteps heavy on the polished marble. Olivia didn't look up, but she could feel his presence. It was a weight she had gotten used to over the past few months. She had never imagined that the man she worked for, the man who seemed so impervious to emotion, could be affected by something as simple as gratitude. But here he was, standing in front of her, his silence telling her everything. "Olivia," Victor said quietly, his voice low but unmistakably soft. "I owe you more than words can say." She looked up, startled by the sincerity in his tone. Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly masked the surprise with a neutral expression. "I didn't do it for thanks," she replied, her voice steady, though she could feel the weight of his gaze on her. I had to." Victor paused, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer than he intended. He had never seen her like this, so open, so real. She wasn't pretending, and that was what shook him the most. Olivia had always kept her distance, never crossing the boundaries between them. But now, in this moment, those boundaries seemed to disappear. He had been wrong about her. She was so much more than just a maid. She was someone who had a heart that cared. "You saved him," he repeated, but this time, there was no hesitation in his voice. "And that means more to me than you could ever know." Olivia nodded, feeling the sincerity in his words. She couldn't bring herself to say anything more. The gratitude in his voice, the way he looked at her, it was too much. It made her feel exposed, vulnerable in a way she wasn't used to. She had always been the one who gave without expecting anything in return. But now, it felt different. She felt like she had crossed a line, and she wasn't sure how to go back. "I need to make sure he's okay," she said, her voice breaking the silence. "I'll stay with him until he wakes up." Victor nodded, but he didn't leave. He stood there, watching her, unable to shake the feeling that this moment, this small act of kindness, had just changed everything. He had always thought that power was the key to everything. That control was what made a man strong. But now he wasn't so sure. He had seen strength in Olivia, a strength that came from a place he had never known. As Olivia sat by Jason's side, her hand still gently resting on his, Victor realized that there was something more important than power, something that could make a person truly powerful. It was the ability to care, the ability to feel. And for the first time in a long while, he felt something he had never expected. He felt alive. It was terrifying, and yet it was freeing. He couldn't ignore it. And for the first time in his life, he didn't want to. "Thank you," he said again, his voice barely audible. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't just an obligation. It was the truth. Olivia looked up at him, her face softening for the first time since the incident. She had always believed that kindness had no place in this world, that the cold, hard truth was all there was. But in that moment, she realized that she had been wrong. Kindness could change everything. It had changed her. It had changed Victor. And as she looked at him, standing there in the doorway, she wondered if this was the beginning of something new, something neither of them had seen coming. Victor didn't leave Olivia's side that night. For hours, he sat by Jason's bed, watching over his son as he slept. The mansion, usually so cold and imposing, now felt warmer somehow. There was an odd stillness to the house, the usual sounds of activity muted, as though the world outside had paused to give them space. Olivia had quietly gone to the kitchen to prepare some warm tea for Jason, but every now and then, she would glance back toward the door to see Victor still standing there. His presence, usually so commanding and filled with power, now seemed quieter, more reflective. He wasn't the man she had seen the day before, the Mafia boss who ruled everything with an iron fist. In the soft glow of the lamp, as he watched over his son, he appeared almost human, a father deeply concerned for his child. It was unsettling, yet strangely comforting. Olivia found herself staring at him from across the room, unsure of how to navigate this new version of him. She had never seen Victor like this before, and part of her wasn't sure what to do with the vulnerability she was now seeing in him. She had always kept a safe distance, focusing solely on her work. But tonight, something had shifted. Something had changed between them. She knew she had done what she had to do. She had acted instinctively, pulling Jason from the water, saving his life. But the weight of the situation lingered in the air, and she couldn't help but wonder what this meant for her. what this meant for them. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft murmur of Jason's breathing. Olivia felt her hands tremble slightly as she set the tea down on the table beside the bed. She had been so focused on Jason's recovery, on ensuring that he was okay, that she hadn't given herself the time to process everything that had happened. She had saved a child, but in doing so, she had exposed herself in ways she hadn't planned for. Victor turned to her then, his eyes searching hers. There was no anger, no judgment, just the quiet weight of gratitude. "You're still here," he said softly, his voice hoarse. "I thought." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "I promised I'd stay," Olivia replied, her voice steady, though her heart was still racing. "He's going to be fine." Victor nodded, his gaze lingering on her. "You've done more than I could have asked," he said, his voice filled with a sincerity she hadn't expected. It was almost as if he was seeing her for the first time. She wasn't just the maid. She wasn't just a servant in his eyes anymore. She was someone who had risked everything to save his son, someone who had done what he couldn't. Olivia couldn't bring herself to say anything more. The silence between them stretched again, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a shared understanding. Neither of them knew exactly what to say, but somehow, in this quiet moment, they didn't need words. They simply understood. "I never thanked you properly," Victor said after a long pause, his voice soft but firm. Olivia felt the weight of his words, but she shook her head slightly. "You don't have to thank me," she said, her gaze lowering to the floor. "It's my job." But even as she said it, she realized how hollow those words felt. This wasn't just a job. Not anymore. And she wasn't just a maid. She was someone who had become an unexpected part of his life. And that, more than anything, was what scared her the most. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what this new connection would mean. She had always kept her distance, always followed the rules. But now, standing in this room with Victor, she wasn't sure if those rules still applied. The moments that followed felt like time itself had slowed. Olivia carefully tucked the blanket around Jason, making sure he was comfortable. Her hands moved with a precision that was second nature to her, but inside, her mind was racing. She could feel Victor's eyes on her, even though he hadn't said a word. His gaze was heavy, filled with something she couldn't quite place. When she finally turned to face him, she saw it. The same conflict in his eyes that she had felt earlier. A question neither of them could answer. The question of what happened now. "I'm glad you're here," Victor said quietly, breaking the silence. The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than they should have. Olivia nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. She wasn't sure if she should say anything at all. "I'm just doing my job," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor studied her for a moment longer before his expression softened. "You're doing more than that," he replied, his tone low but genuine. Olivia swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had never been one for grand gestures or declarations. She had always kept her feelings hidden, buried beneath the surface. But tonight, everything felt different. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she was ready to hide anymore. The next few days passed in a haze of quiet tension. Olivia kept her distance from Victor, as she always had, though the weight of what had transpired between them lingered in the air. Jason had recovered quickly, but the ripple effect of that day continued to haunt Olivia. She wasn't used to the way things had shifted. She wasn't used to being seen, truly seen, by the man she had always considered distant and untouchable. The mansion, which had once felt like her sanctuary, now felt more like a cage. Every corner seemed to echo with the uncertainty she now felt. Victor, on the other hand, seemed to retreat into himself even more. He carried the weight of his responsibilities on his shoulders, but Olivia could see something else in his eyes whenever they crossed paths. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a new understanding, a new respect. She wasn't sure if it was something he was trying to suppress, or if it was something he had finally accepted. Either way, the unspoken tension between them had changed the atmosphere in the house. One evening, as Olivia was finishing her duties, she found herself standing by the window in the grand living room. The mansion was quiet, save for the soft hum of the city in the distance. She gazed out at the sprawling grounds, her mind wandering to the family she had left behind and the life she had once dreamed of. But that dream had felt so far away now. She had never imagined her life turning out like this. working for a man who controlled so much of the world around her. And yet, in some strange way, it had become her reality. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Victor entering the room. He looked different. His usual sharp, confident presence had softened slightly, as though the events of the past few days had caused him to reflect in ways he hadn't before. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, watching her with a thoughtful expression. Olivia felt a strange tension stir in her chest. She hadn't expected him to come looking for her. In fact, she had spent the last few days trying to keep her distance, not wanting to confront whatever it was between them. "You don't have to be on edge," Victor said quietly, his voice breaking the silence. Olivia blinked, not sure how to respond. She hadn't realized how tense she had become. "I'm not," she started, but the words faltered. The truth was, she was on edge. She wasn't sure what to make of her own feelings, much less what Victor might be feeling. Victor walked closer, his gaze never leaving hers. There was something different in the way he looked at her now, something more personal, less distant. He wasn't the man who had stood by in silence, watching her fulfill her duties from a place of authority. No, this time, it felt as though he was looking at her as a person, as someone who had earned his respect. "I know it's been a strange few days," he said, his tone softer than she had expected. "But I want you to know that what you did." He paused, searching for the right words. "It wasn't just about saving Jason. It was about something more. Something that you've shown me that I didn't think I would see." Olivia swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. She had never been one for compliments, let alone gratitude from someone like him. She had always been invisible, a shadow in the background. But now, Victor's words made her feel seen, in a way that made her uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being noticed. "I didn't do it for anything," she replied, her voice steady but guarded. "I just did what was right." Victor studied her for a moment, his eyes searching hers. Then, to her surprise, he nodded, as if accepting her answer. "I understand that," he said quietly. "But what you did..." He trailed off again, clearly struggling to put his thoughts into words. "I don't know if I could have done what you did. I don't know if I would have been able to act in the same way." Olivia felt a strange warmth spread through her chest at his words. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to admit anything like this, let alone to her. But something in the air had shifted, and she could feel it. The way he looked at her, the way he spoke. There was no distance now. There was no barrier between them. They were both just people. Two people who had experienced something profound and life-changing. Olivia didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded. She wasn't sure what this meant for her, for them. But she could feel it. The change, the understanding. It was more than just a job now. It was more than just saving a child. It was the beginning of something new, something neither of them had anticipated. "Thank you," Victor said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." Olivia's heart fluttered, and for the first time in days, she felt something other than fear or uncertainty. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, it was a future worth facing. The following days were filled with a quiet kind of tension that neither Olivia nor Victor seemed able to shake. The usual hum of the mansion had become muted, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Olivia carried on with her duties, though her mind was often elsewhere, caught in the whirl of the events that had unfolded. She couldn't help but notice the small changes in Victor's behavior, the way he would sometimes watch her from across the room, his eyes no longer cold and distant, but thoughtful, searching. She hadn't been able to avoid the shift between them, but she didn't know how to navigate it. It wasn't that she wanted things to go back to the way they were. It was just that she wasn't sure what this new dynamic meant. What had once been a clear, defined relationship between employer and employee was now muddied by something else. Something unspoken. Olivia found herself alone one evening, standing by the grand staircase, lost in thought. She had just finished her duties for the night, and the silence of the house felt almost suffocating. The air was still and thick, as if every corner of the mansion was waiting for something. She felt like she was waiting for something too. She wasn't sure what it was, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her life, her world, was about to change in a way she couldn't control. As she stood there, staring out the window at the darkened grounds, she heard footsteps approach. She knew it was Victor before she even turned around. There was something in the weight of his step, the way the air seemed to shift when he entered a room. He didn't say anything at first, just stood a few feet away, watching her with that same quiet intensity she had come to recognize. Olivia didn't look at him right away. She wasn't sure if she wanted to face him or if she just needed a moment to collect herself. After a few seconds, she finally turned to meet his gaze. His eyes were darker than usual, but there was something there that hadn't been there before, something softer. Olivia, he said her name quietly, as though testing the sound of it on his tongue. It was the first time he had used her name so casually, and the weight of it struck her. She didn't answer right away, unsure of what to say. He took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've been distant," he said, his voice low but firm. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. Olivia swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. She had been distant. She had been pulling away, though she wasn't entirely sure. Why? Maybe it was the unease she felt around him now, or maybe it was just the confusion that had settled deep inside her. "I've just been focused on work," she said, her voice steady but quieter than usual. Victor studied her for a moment longer, then nodded as if he understood. "I know." He paused for a beat, as if carefully choosing his next words. "But I think we need to talk." Olivia's heart skipped a beat at the seriousness of his tone. She wasn't sure what this conversation would be about, but something in her gut told her it was important. She didn't say anything, just nodded. Victor took another step forward, closing the space between them. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," he continued, his voice softer now. "About what happened, and about what it means." Olivia could feel the weight of his words, but she didn't know how to respond. She had been trying to avoid confronting what had happened between them, to avoid the feelings that had surfaced, but now it felt inevitable. "It doesn't have to change anything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did what I had to do." Victor's gaze softened, and he shook his head. "I know you did, but it's not just about that." He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. "I think it's time I stopped pretending I don't see you. I see what you did, and I see you." Olivia's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. She had spent so much of her life hiding, keeping herself out of view, never expecting to be seen. But now, standing in front of Victor, the man who had always kept his distance, she felt exposed in a way she wasn't ready for. "You don't have to," she began, but Victor cut her off gently. "I do have to," he said, his voice quiet but filled with a kind of finality. "I've spent my life building walls around myself, around my emotions. I've built an empire on control, on power. But you—" He trailed off for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "You showed me something else. Something I didn't even realize I was missing." Olivia stared at him, her heart racing. She had never expected him to say something like that. She had always thought he was untouchable, unreachable. But now, in this moment, he was standing in front of her, as vulnerable as she had ever been. "Victor, she started, but she couldn't finish the sentence. Her mind was spinning, and for the first time, she didn't know what to say. He stepped closer, closing the gap between them. "I don't know where this goes," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to find out. I want to figure it out." Olivia's chest tightened, and for a moment, she felt like she couldn't breathe. She didn't know what this meant. She didn't know what the future held. But for the first time, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt before: hope. Days passed, and the quiet tension between Olivia and Victor lingered, hanging in the air like the stillness before a storm. It was as if the world outside the mansion had frozen, leaving only the two of them, caught in a moment that neither could define nor escape. Olivia had kept herself busy with her duties, focusing on the mundane tasks that had once been a refuge for her. But now, nothing felt ordinary. Every glance, every word, seemed to carry more weight than it ever had before. Victor, too, seemed to be a different man. Gone was the cold, calculating boss who demanded control at every turn. Instead, there was a man who looked at Olivia with something deeper: respect, perhaps, or maybe something else that neither of them could quite name. Olivia couldn't deny the change in him. She saw it in the way he spoke to her now, the way he acknowledged her presence without the distance he had once kept. But that only made things harder for her. She wasn't used to being seen. She wasn't used to being acknowledged as anything other than the maid, the one who was invisible, the one who was always in the background. It was terrifying, and yet, it was also strangely liberating. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the mansion's grand hall, Olivia found herself standing by the large windows again, lost in thought. The sound of her footsteps echoed softly against the marble floors, the only sound in the quiet house. She didn't know why she had come here. Perhaps it was the need for space, or perhaps it was the overwhelming weight of everything that had happened. She felt like she was on the edge of something that was both exhilarating and terrifying. She heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her, and before she could turn, Victor's voice broke the silence. "Olivia." She stiffened slightly, but didn't turn to face him immediately. "Victor," she replied, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. She had spent so much time avoiding him, avoiding the emotions that were starting to surface between them. But now, it felt impossible to keep up the distance. "You're distant again," Victor said, his tone more serious than usual. "I know you're trying to keep your distance, but I need to know where we stand." Olivia hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She could feel his eyes on her, piercing through the silence, but she couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. "I don't know what you want me to say," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've already done more than I ever expected," Victor continued, his voice softer now, though still laced with an intensity she couldn't ignore. "You've saved my son. But this, the way things have been between us, it can't just stay like this." Olivia felt her chest tighten. She knew what he meant. They couldn't just continue pretending that nothing had changed. "I didn't do it for anything," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I did it because it was right. I did it because I care about him." There was a long pause, and when she finally turned to face him, she found Victor standing closer than before, his eyes locked on hers. "I know," he said quietly, "but it's not just about that. It's about what I've come to realize." He stepped closer, closing the distance between them, and Olivia's heart skipped a beat. "What have you realized?" she asked, her voice soft, unsure of where this conversation was headed. Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing lightly against hers. It was a simple touch, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her. She hadn't expected that, hadn't expected him to touch her like that. But there it was, a gesture that felt more intimate than anything he had ever done before. "I've realized that I don't want to hide behind the walls I've built anymore," Victor said, his voice low and steady. "I've spent my entire life protecting myself from feeling anything, from letting anyone in. But you've shown me that there's more to life than control, more to life than power." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to say that, hadn't expected him to be so open with her. "Victor," she started, but the words faltered. She didn't know how to respond. How could she? She wasn't used to being the one someone wanted to open up to. "I know this isn't easy," he said, his hand still resting gently on hers. "But I think we need to stop pretending. I think we need to see each other for who we really are." Olivia stood there, frozen, as his words sank in. She had never allowed herself to imagine a world where she could be more than what she was in this house. More than the maid. More than the invisible woman who moved quietly in the background. But now, with Victor's hand on hers, she wondered if maybe that could change. Maybe this moment could be the beginning of something new. She wasn't sure what that meant, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe she wasn't invisible after all. Maybe she was seen. The days following that conversation with Victor were a strange mixture of unease and something else. Something Olivia couldn't quite name. The tension between them was still there, but it had shifted. There was a quiet understanding that lingered in the air, unspoken but ever present. Olivia continued with her duties, her usual routine, but everything felt different. Every task seemed to carry more weight. Every glance from Victor lingered a little longer than it had before. She didn't know what to do with the new dynamic between them. She had always been the invisible one, just a part of the background. But now, it felt as if she were being seen, really seen, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. The days turned into weeks, and though things remained mostly the same, there was an unspoken change that neither of them acknowledged. The mansion still felt like a place of power, control, and distance, but somehow, it no longer felt as cold. There were moments when Victor would pass by, her in the hall, and instead of ignoring her, he would meet her gaze, nod, or even offer a small smile. It was subtle, but it was enough to make her heart race each time. She found herself wondering if he truly saw her now, or if it was just a fleeting moment of vulnerability that would fade once the weight of their circumstances returned. One evening, As the sun began to set and the golden light filtered through the windows, Olivia found herself standing by the grand piano in the sitting room. She wasn't playing, but simply standing there, letting the silence fill the space. She didn't know what she was doing, just that she needed to be alone for a moment. It was then that she heard footsteps approaching. Victor. She didn't turn to face him right away, her back still to him, her hands clasped in front of her. "You're here again," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't expected. She turned to face him, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the soft, but serious expression on his face. "I didn't mean to," she started, but Victor raised a hand, cutting her off gently. "No, it's fine," he said, his voice low. I wanted to talk." Olivia felt her heart race, her hands suddenly clammy. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when they would have to confront whatever it was that was happening between them. "About what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor took a step closer, his gaze steady but filled with something she couldn't read. "About everything," he said simply. "About how things have changed. About what we're both afraid of." Olivia's throat tightened, and she suddenly felt exposed in a way she hadn't before. She had always kept her distance, never allowed herself to feel too much, to become too attached. But now, in the quiet of the room, with Victor standing in front of her, everything felt too real. "I don't know what's happening," Olivia confessed, her voice soft but honest. "I don't know what you want from me." Victor looked at her, his expression softening. "I'm not sure I know what I want either," he admitted, his voice filled with an unexpected vulnerability. "But I do know one thing. I can't pretend this isn't happening. I can't pretend that we're not changing." Olivia swallowed hard, her eyes locking onto his. She wasn't sure if she should say something, if she should back away, but she couldn't move. Something had shifted between them, and she couldn't ignore it. "What does that mean?" she asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. Victor took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "It means that we can't keep hiding from this," he said softly. "Whatever it is, whatever it's becoming." Olivia's heart fluttered in her chest, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. She had never been good with emotions, never been one to wear her heart on her sleeve. But Victor's words, the way he was looking at her, it made her want to step forward, to let go of the fear that had always held her back. "And if we can't hide from it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Then what?" Victor paused, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to find the right words. Finally, he stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. The touch was tentative at first, but it carried a warmth she hadn't expected. "Then we face it," he said, his voice steady but filled with a depth of emotion she hadn't heard before. Olivia's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel. She allowed herself to acknowledge the change, the shift in the air. She didn't know where this would go, or what it would mean for her, for him, or for them. But in that moment, with Victor standing in front of her, his hand on her arm, she realized something. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just the maid. She was a person, someone who mattered. And for the first time in a long time, that thought didn't scare her. The air between Olivia and Victor seemed to shift with every passing moment, a tension that neither could completely ignore, yet neither was ready to confront fully. As the days passed, Olivia's internal battle grew. She had never expected to find herself in this position, caught between the role she had played for so long and the possibility of something new, something she didn't know how to navigate. The work that had once been a refuge for her now felt like a cage, its boundaries blurring, becoming harder to define with each passing day. She found herself looking at Victor differently, too. She had always seen him as an impenetrable figure, a man whose life was defined by power and control. But now, there was something more, something human, something vulnerable that made him seem more real, more accessible than before. She noticed the small changes in him, the moments where his gaze lingered a little longer than it had, when his voice softened in a way it never had before. Yet, she also noticed his retreat, his moments of silence where the distance between them seemed to grow again, as if he too was struggling with what was happening. One evening, Olivia found herself standing in the garden, the cool night air brushing against her skin as she gazed up at the stars. It was a rare moment when she allowed herself to pause, to simply exist without the weight of duty hanging over her. The mansion stood behind her, silent and still, its windows reflecting the moonlight. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this unsettled, this unsure of what was to come. She heard the soft crunch of footsteps on the gravel, and for a split second, she hoped it was just the wind. But when she turned, she saw Victor approaching, his silhouette outlined against the dim light of the mansion. He didn't speak right away, his eyes studying her as he came closer. Olivia felt a jolt of awareness run through her, and she turned slightly, unsure of how to react. It was as if everything had changed in the space of just a few days. "You've been avoiding me," Victor said quietly, his voice low but steady. Olivia felt her heart skip a beat. "I haven't been avoiding you," she replied, though the words felt hollow, even to her. She had been avoiding something, but it wasn't just him. It was the fear of what would happen if they truly acknowledged what was growing between them. Victor's eyes softened, and he stepped a little closer. "I'm not going to bite, Olivia," he said with a hint of a smile. It was the first time he had said something that wasn't laden with authority or control, and it startled her. It was almost like he was trying to make her feel at ease, but she wasn't sure. She could. "It's not that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just, everything feels different." Victor nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "I know." He didn't say anything more for a long moment. Olivia could feel the weight of the silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt almost like they were both trying to come to terms with something unspoken, something that was neither good nor bad, but simply there. "I don't know how to do this," Olivia admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I don't know what this is." Victor regarded her quietly, his gaze unwavering. "I don't either," he said softly, "but I know we can't keep pretending it's not happening. Neither of us is fooling anyone." Olivia felt a lump form in her throat at his words. She wasn't sure why, but something in the way he said it made her want to believe him, to trust that whatever was happening between them wasn't just a fleeting moment. Maybe it could be something real, something more than just the roles they had always played. "I don't want to pretend anymore either," she said, her voice steadier now, though the uncertainty was still there. "But I don't know where this leads." Victor stepped closer, his presence surrounding her, yet it didn't feel suffocating. It felt like an invitation. "I don't either," he admitted, "but we'll figure it out. Together." Olivia's heart raced at his words, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of possibility she hadn't thought she'd ever have again. She wasn't sure what this would mean for her, for him, or for the world they inhabited. But in this moment, she felt something shift inside her, a quiet strength that she hadn't known was there. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was someone who could be seen, someone who could make her own choices. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. "I don't know what happens next," Olivia said, her voice a little stronger. "But I'm willing to find out." Victor smiled then, the kind of smile that didn't come from a place of power, but from something softer, more genuine. "Good," he said, "because I'm not going anywhere." The days that followed were filled with a new kind of uncertainty, a quiet anticipation that neither Olivia nor Victor could escape. Things were different now, that much was certain, but neither of them knew exactly what that meant. The mansion, once a place where Olivia had gone through the motions of her duties with little thought, now felt like a maze of emotions, each hallway, each room, carrying the weight of their unspoken feelings. Victor was present, as always, but there was a subtle shift in the way he carried himself. He wasn't the same man she had met months ago, the man who seemed cold and distant. Now, there was something softer about him, something that made Olivia wonder what had happened to the walls he had so carefully constructed around himself. He didn't hide behind power the way he used to. Instead, he seemed to be searching for something he wasn't ready to admit yet. And Olivia, she wasn't sure what she was searching for. She had never allowed herself to dream of a life different from the one she had, the life where she was just the maid, invisible to everyone. But now, with Victor's attention on her, with his words that seemed to carry more weight than before, she found herself questioning everything she had known. One evening, Olivia was sitting in the kitchen, preparing a small meal for herself. It had been a long day, and she was grateful for the quiet. The mansion was still, its usual buzz of activity muted by the late hour. She stirred the pot on the stove, the smell of simmering herbs filling the air, when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned, expecting it to be one of the staff, but instead, it was Victor. He was standing in the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. Olivia froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. She had grown accustomed to avoiding him, to keeping her distance. But tonight, there was no escaping him. He stepped into the kitchen, his gaze never leaving hers. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said quietly. Olivia nodded, though she wasn't sure what he meant by that. He had every right to be there. This was his house, after all. But something about the way he was looking at her made her feel like she was the one interrupting his thoughts. "You're not interrupting," she said, her voice steady, though she could feel the tension building between them. "Is everything okay?" Victor asked, his tone soft but laced with concern. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard him speak like that before, with such genuine care in his voice. It was as though the power, the distance that had once defined their relationship, had faded into the background. And for the first time, Olivia realized that she wasn't just a part of the furniture in his life. She was someone he noticed. "Everything's fine," she replied, though she could feel the weight of his gaze pressing on her. She stirred the pot again, not sure what else to say. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else, something that felt new and unfamiliar. Finally, Victor spoke again, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day," he said, stepping a little closer. Olivia felt a flush rise to her cheeks, but she didn't look at him. Instead, she focused on the stove, trying to steady her nerves. She hadn't expected him to bring it up again, hadn't expected him to acknowledge it at all. "What did I say?" she asked, her voice soft. Victor took another step toward her, and Olivia could feel the space between them closing. "You said that you didn't know what this was," he said, his voice low but steady. "And I think I understand what you meant now. I don't know what this is either, but I know that I don't want to ignore it anymore." Olivia felt her breath catch in her throat. She didn't know how to respond, didn't know if she was ready to admit that she, too, had been thinking about the same thing. She had tried to push it away, to focus on the things she could control. But the truth was, she couldn't stop thinking about him. "Victor, she started, but her words trailed off as she looked up at him. He was standing right in front of her now, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "I don't want to complicate things," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to make this harder than it already is." Victor's expression softened, and he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a shock of warmth through her. "Olivia," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I'm not trying to complicate anything. I just want to be honest with you. And I think, for the first time in my life, I'm ready to stop hiding." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at him. She had always kept her distance, had always convinced herself that this, whatever this was, could never happen. But now, with his hand in hers, with the truth hanging between them, she felt a shift. Something had changed, something that neither of them could ignore. "I'm not ready for this," she said quietly, though the words didn't feel like they matched what she was truly feeling. "I don't know what this means for us." Victor smiled gently, his thumb brushing over the back of her hand. "I don't know either," he admitted, "but I'm willing to find out. Together." Olivia looked at him, her heart still racing but her mind clearer than it had been in days. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something real, something she had never allowed herself to believe in before. And maybe that was enough, for now. The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet tension, but it was a tension neither Olivia nor Victor could escape. It was as though the air between them had thickened, each of them sensing something they couldn't name, yet both knew it was there, lingering like a secret neither of them was brave enough to fully acknowledge. They continued with their lives, their roles within the mansion unchanged on the surface, but beneath it all, something was shifting. Olivia found herself caught between the comfort of her old routine and the uncertainty of what was to come. She had never been one to dwell on the future, always focused on the present, the tasks at hand. But now, every moment seemed to stretch on, filled with questions she didn't have answers to. What was she to Victor now? What was he to her? She had never allowed herself to think too much about these things, but now they were unavoidable. She could feel his presence more keenly than ever, and though he didn't speak of it, she knew he was feeling the same pull. One evening, as she was finishing her work, she found herself alone in the garden again, the cool breeze brushing against her skin, the scent of flowers filling the air. It was the only time she felt like she could breathe, away from the eyes of the mansion, away from the weight of her thoughts. As she walked along the stone path, lost in her own thoughts, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She knew who it was before she even turned around. Victor. He was always there, always nearby, as though he was silently watching over her without ever truly saying anything. "Olivia," he said, his voice low and steady, causing her to pause and turn to face him. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she had the feeling that tonight, something would finally be said. Something would finally break the silence between them. "Victor," she replied, her voice steady but quieter than usual. "What is it?" Victor didn't immediately answer. He just stood there for a moment, studying her, his expression unreadable. It was as if he was searching for the right words, but even then, he wasn't sure what to say. "I've been thinking," he said finally, taking a step closer. "About what we talked about. About what's been happening between us." Olivia's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had been thinking about it too, but hearing him speak it aloud made it all the more real. "I don't want to complicate things," she said quietly, her hands unconsciously clenching at her sides. "I don't want to make this harder than it already is." Victor took another step toward her, closing the gap between them. "I'm not trying to complicate anything," he said softly, his voice carrying a sincerity she hadn't expected. "I just want to be honest. I want to face whatever this is. I think we both do." Olivia swallowed hard, her eyes locked on his. "But what if we don't know what it is?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor's gaze softened, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Then we figure it out together," he said simply. His words sent a wave of warmth through her, and though she wasn't sure where this path would lead, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. It was the same pull she had been fighting for weeks, the same pull that had been growing stronger with each passing day. "But how do we do that?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "How do we go from here?" Victor reached out, his hand gently touching her arm. It was a simple touch, but it sent a ripple of electricity through her. It was as if, with that touch, he was telling her everything he hadn't been able to say. "One step at a time," he said quietly. "We take it one step at a time." Olivia felt her breath catch in her throat. She had always been so guarded, so careful, never allowing herself to feel too much. But now, standing here with Victor, she felt something she had never felt before. Something that made her want to take that first step, even if she didn't know where it would lead. "I don't know what the future holds," she said softly, "but I'm willing to try." Victor smiled, the corners of his mouth turning upward just slightly. It wasn't a smile of triumph or victory, but a smile of understanding, of something deeper than either of them had expected. "I'm glad," he said quietly. "I'm glad you're willing to try." And in that moment, with Victor's hand still resting lightly on her arm, Olivia realized that she wasn't alone in this anymore. She didn't know what the future held for them, but for the first time, she felt a sense of peace about it. Whatever happened, they would face it together, step by step. And that, in itself, was enough to begin with. The days after their conversation felt different, charged with an unspoken understanding that neither Olivia nor Victor could shake. Their lives continued, their routines seemingly unchanged, but there was something in the air now, something that hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. Olivia found herself lost in her thoughts more often, trying to make sense of the new dynamic between them. She had always been careful to keep her distance, to focus on the tasks at hand. But now, that felt impossible. She was aware of Victor in ways she had never been before. His presence seemed to fill every room, every space they shared. Every time they crossed paths, there was a new depth to their interactions, a new layer of meaning to the words they exchanged. Victor, too, seemed affected by what had passed between them. He was still the same in many ways, commanding, composed, but there was a subtle shift in the way he regarded Olivia. It was no longer just about power, about control. There was something softer now, something more genuine, something that made Olivia feel seen in ways she hadn't expected. She had always felt invisible, a part of the background, but now she wasn't so sure. One evening, after a long day of work, Olivia found herself walking through the mansion's grand hall, the echo of her footsteps bouncing off the marble floors. The house was quiet, the staff long gone for the evening, leaving her alone in the silence. She had been trying to push aside the thoughts that had been clouding her mind, but tonight, they seemed unavoidable. She wasn't sure why she had come to this place, why she felt the need to linger, but the house felt different now, charged with a quiet tension that seemed to follow her wherever she went. It was then that she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Victor approaching, his figure tall and steady, his eyes locked on hers. He had been more distant lately, more preoccupied with his own thoughts. But tonight, he seemed to be drawn to her, as if he couldn't stay away. "Olivia," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I've been thinking." Olivia felt a flutter in her chest at the sound of his voice. She had been trying not to think about him, trying to push away the growing attraction she felt toward him, but every moment spent in his presence seemed to make it harder. She turned to face him, her heart racing. "About what?" she asked, her voice steady despite the swirl of emotions inside her. Victor hesitated for a moment, his gaze shifting slightly, as if he was uncertain of what to say next. "About everything," he said quietly. "About us." Olivia felt her breath catch in her throat. She had been waiting for this moment, had known it was coming, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure how to respond. "Victor, she started, but he cut her off before she could finish. "I know this isn't easy," he said, his tone softer now, "but I can't keep pretending like nothing's changed between us. We both know it has." Olivia looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known it too, but hearing him say it out loud made it feel more real, more undeniable. "I didn't want to complicate things," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to make this harder than it already is." Victor stepped closer, closing the space between them. "It's not about making it harder," he said, his voice gentle now. "It's about facing it, about being honest with ourselves. We've both felt this connection, and I don't want to ignore it anymore." Olivia swallowed hard, feeling her emotions swell inside her. She had spent so much of her life burying her feelings, pushing them down, but now, with Victor standing in front of her, those walls felt like they were crumbling. "I don't know what this means," she whispered. "I don't know what this is." Victor smiled softly, his eyes filled with something that made her chest tighten. "Neither do I," he said, his voice full of quiet sincerity, "but I want to find out. Together." Olivia's heart raced at his words, a warmth spreading through her. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know where this path would lead them, but for the first time, she felt like she could take a step forward without fear. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she knew she didn't want to walk away from whatever this was. "I don't know what happens next," she said, her voice steadier now, "but I'm willing to try." Victor's smile deepened, and for the first time in a long time, Olivia felt a sense of peace wash over her. The uncertainty that had gripped her for so long seemed to lift, replaced by the quiet possibility of something new. "That's all we can do," he said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "One step at a time." And for the first time, Olivia felt like she wasn't alone in this, like she didn't have to carry the weight of the unknown on her own. They would face it together, whatever it was. The future was uncertain, yes, but in this moment, it didn't matter. Because for the first time in a long time, Olivia felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be.